What's your message to those who try to convert Hindus, whether to Christianity, Islam, or atheism? What are your tips for parenting young children and instilling Hindu pride? What are the cultural differences between Hindus raised in India versus those raised in North America? What is up, guys? Sean here from Hindu Lifestyle. That's how I used to start my videos way back in the day in 2018 when I first started. But today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. I've been reading your comments and questions and reflections, and today we're going to be doing an Ask Me Anything, an AMA. These are real questions submitted by you, my viewers from across the world, whether it be the Caribbean, Canada, USA to Bharat itself. It's something that I haven't done before, but I've been meaning to get to it as I approach 40,000 subscribers here on my YouTube channel. What can I say? I am forever grateful for you, the viewers, to the community, to everyone that is interested in listening to the stories about the Hindu diaspora. Together we are going to form the global Hindu community. I have over 20 questions that were submitted. This video will most likely be split up into two parts. So settle down, grab something to drink, and let's get to it. So question 1 is from Vedawati Ram 1974, and she asks, is there any effort by pundits or Hindu leaders to address the rum drinking culture in chutney music, like the rum till I die mentality? Oh my God, we're starting off strong with this first question. So before I dive in, let me give you some context, especially for those viewers who are outside of the Caribbean who might not know what rum till I die refers to. Over time, it's come to represent this wider culture of glorifying alcohol in parts of the Indo-Caribbean community. This isn't really about music, but it is a real issue. Alcoholism in the Caribbean, especially the Indo-Caribbean diaspora, is a serious problem. And if you want to understand why, you have to look at the history. Alcohol was a tool of control during indentureship, and that legacy didn't just disappear. And today it's gotten to the point where many Hindu temples, especially here in North America, they've stopped hosting Hindu weddings by those from the Caribbean because people drink right outside the mandir. I've seen it firsthand. Growing up, we had to call the police at the Devi Mandir during weddings because guests were getting drunk and out of control. And even then, my father and myself were the ones who were getting yelled at. So now back to the actual question. Are Hindu leaders doing anything to address this? Some actually are. I've seen pundits speak out against this culture, but often they get attacked for it. They're called boring or backward or out of touch. And even I've called it out. I made a video about this back in about 2017 or 2018 about influencers promoting the club lifestyle under the guise of culture. But let me be clear, I don't think the problem is chutney music itself. Chutney music is a reflection of society. It can be beautiful, rooted, and even joyful. I grew up listening to what was known as old school chutney music. The issue is when music starts glorifying destructive behavior like alcoholism. Then it becomes this cycle where society influences music, and then music then reinforces that behavior back into society. So who is responsible? Honestly, we all are. Parents, leaders, influencers, artists. Until we're willing to stop celebrating alcohol as a culture, nothing will change. Maybe it's time I do a video on alcoholism in the Indo-Caribbean community. Let me know in the comments if it's something that you want. Question number 2. Suprita Bolo 3994 asks, what are your tips for parenting young children and instilling Hindu pride? I use Bal Vihar and try to model the right behavior and language. Great question, and one that I think a lot of parents are asking right now. So let's start with this term itself, Hindu pride. What does it actually mean to say you're a proud Hindu? I think at its core, there's some type of acknowledgement that we belong to one of the world's oldest and deepest traditions. One that has survived everything from invasions to colonizations to modern day pressures to conform. And we didn't just survive, we carried mantras, our pujas, our philosophies, our values. We went across oceans, that's how I'm here, and into new worlds. And that's not something small, it's big. But where the challenge comes in, especially for us in the diaspora, is that many fields don't feel that pride because we were never shown why this matters. We have years of internalized Hindu phobia, pressure to assimilate, fear of being too different. All of that makes us pull back from identifying as a Hindu. It becomes something private, actually. For some of us growing up, maybe even being Hindu was a source of embarrassment. So to answer your question, if we want to instill pride in our children, in the next generation, we first have to show them the value that Hinduism has in our daily life. Not that it's just scientific, not that it's just cool or ancient, but it actually helps them to live a better life. Teach them that Dharma is about doing the right thing, even when it's hard. That our pujas and festivals aren't just parties. They're rooted in some type of cosmic rhythm, of an attitude of gratitude, of giving back. And chanting mantra is not just some noise and sounds that we hear, but it's a tool to steady your mind. And most importantly, we have to live Hinduism. Kids may not always listen to what we have to say, but they're watching what we're doing. And if they see us stand up for Hindu values and speak positively about our identity and practice it with joy, not with guilt or shame, they're going to absorb that. And using Bal Vihar or Bal Vikas or Bal Gokulam, those are all great. Use it as a forum to ask questions. Let your children ask you questions and use that as a point of discovery. And use that so that they can gain knowledge of who they are. Question 3. Anjali asks, how do we challenge the term mythology, which is often used to dismiss our rich civilizational history? And why are Abrahamic texts treated as historical while ours are seen as superstition? All right, I need to get water for that. This is going to hit heavy. This is one of those questions that cuts right to the heart of how Hinduism is misunderstood, especially here growing up in North America. First, let's start with the word myth. For many people, myth means something fictional, like fairy tales or legends, things that never really happened. So when our texts like the Ramayana or the Mahabharata get labeled Hindu mythology, it often carries this sort of subtle implication that they're just stories. They're not history, they're not fact, and they're not sacred. Now, some scholars and Hindus try to reclaim the term. They'll say myth doesn't mean fake. It means a symbolic narrative that expresses deeper truths. Sure, maybe that's one angle. But personally, I tend to reject the term altogether, especially when it's applied to Hinduism. Why? The baggage it carries, especially in colonial and Western academic contexts. Myth has been used as a polite way to say, your religion isn't real. And let's not forget, superstition and mythology were labels used by European colonizers to diminish Hindu knowledge systems. The word superstition itself has Latin roots, and Christians use them to describe pagan beliefs that survived alongside the church. This same idea was then applied to India, to Bharat, where everything from our rituals to astronomy was seen as primitive and even backward, while the Bible and the Torah were treated as historical documents. But here's the real kicker. No one calls Moses a myth. No one refers to Jesus walking on the water as Christian mythology, yet the idea of Hanuman flying is immediately labeled as some type of fantasy. That double standard, it's about power. It's about whose stories get framed as real and whose get relegated to some type of fantasy. So how do you challenge this as a Hindu? First, I think we need to be precise with our language. It's something that I do in my Bal Vikas classes that I teach. Call the Ramayana an itihas, which literally means, thus it happened. Call the Puranas sacred texts or civilizational memories. Push back when you see the word mythology because it's used to dismiss or belittle. Second, we need to educate. These texts aren't just religious, they're historical, they're philosophical, they're literary, and they're cultural treasures of Bharat. They've shaped so many things from art to ethics to our daily lives. This happened over 3, 4, 5,000 years. And finally, don't apologize for being Hindu. Our scriptures, our stories, don't treat them as second tier, because if we do that, how would anyone treat them with respect? Question 4 and question 5. User Aberzin LB6L asks, how are Hindus doing in the Caribbean? Is the situation improving or getting worse? Ash Savant 949 also asks, what is the present condition of Hindus in the Caribbean? That's a pretty big question, and honestly, it's one I've been thinking about a lot because the answer isn't as simple as you think. I visited Guyana. The last time I was there was 2007, and I visited Trinidad in 2006, so quite some time ago. But even without being there physically, I do stay connected, whether through messages or comments or WhatsApp groups, and of course social media. And what I'm hearing on the ground, it's actually quite alarming. Let's start with the numbers. In Guyana, Hindus make up roughly 35% of the population back in the 1980s. Today that number is probably closer to 31%, and it's been declining. In Trinidad, the Hindu population sits about 24%, but it was down from about 30% over a few decades ago. And if we're being real, some researchers I've read predict that if the current trend continues, Hindus could make up less than 1% of the population in another 50 years. Why? A mix of things, I think. There's conversion to Christianity, and in the Caribbean, the Pentecostal churches, it's a pretty big thing. There's migration, there's low birth rates, but it's more than numbers, and what have a lot of people told me is that our temples in the Caribbean are struggling. There's of course the internal politics, there's lack of youth involvement, and same thing happening here in Canada. Sometimes there's outright disrespect too, temples being vandalized, rituals being mocked on social media, and Hindu spaces are being pushed outside of the public view. At the same time, there's a lot of social things. I already spoke about alcoholism, domestic violence is big, mental health struggles. I've heard from some from the Guyana and Trinidad reach out to tell me that we need help because our community is falling apart. But you know what? Not everything is doom and gloom. There are organizations, and in particular in Trinidad, the Sanatan Dharma Mahasabha, they're still holding strong. They run over 150 mandirs. There's 42 Hindu schools. They have their own radio station and TV station. They have big events like Diwali Nagar that draws over 100,000 people. Of course, there's celebration and there's Hindu pride, but I think we are at a crossroads. So I think in the coming months and the coming years, I'll be planning a series of videos and interviews focused on going deeper into this topic. I want to talk to temple leaders and youth organizers and activists and everyday people from the Caribbean to hear what's really happening. Because if we don't talk about what's happening right now, and if we don't document, we're at risk of losing our Hindu community. And you know what? I want to see the Caribbean Hindu community thrive. It's important. So let me know in the comments if these are the stories that you want me to cover. This is just the beginning of something much bigger that I'm going to start documenting. Question 6. It's Ravi's asks, are Caribbean Hindus united as a political or social force, or are they divided by caste, sect, or language? Great question. Pretty important one too. So, first things first, I don't follow Trinidad and Guyanese politics. Why? Because I got my own Canadian politics to follow. I follow a little bit of the Indian politics, but I do follow the major headlines that are coming out of Trinidad and Guyana. For those that are aware, Trinidad recently re-elected an Indian origin prime minister, but even within her own party, there was significant infighting. So political unity isn't straightforward. That said, Caribbean Hindus, especially in Trinidad, have shown moments of remarkable unity, particularly under institutions like the Sanatan Dharma Mahasabha. I've spoken about this organization before in some other videos, but they work to preserve Hindu education, culture, and they fought for Hindu rights. Without it, Hindus might not have had the same religious visibility across schools, media, or even their institutions. Second, as for caste, sect, or language, those aren't the main dividing lines in the Caribbean context. Most Indo-Caribbean Hindus, they descend from Bhojpuri-speaking migrants, so there's actually a lot of shared cultural memory. Caste systems mostly broke down during indentureship. If there's division today, it tends to be along class, social class, or political affiliation, and sometimes even urban versus living in the countryside. Not traditional caste that you might hear about in India. So are we united? At times, yes, especially when it comes to preserving our religious identity, but we've also seen how sometimes personal ambitions and party politics that can always fragment any group. This is something that I think we as a community need to reflect on if we want to build lasting institutions for the future. Question 7. Rajus222 asks, what are the cultural differences between Hindus raised in India versus those raised in North America, especially when it comes to relationships and values like individualism or liberalism? How do we navigate those differences? I was actually hoping for an easy question, but no, this gets very, very deep. So let's see if we can tackle this one by one. So let's start with the big picture. I think there's a real disconnect between Hindus raised in India and those raised in the West, especially for second or third generation immigrants. The first generation folks, people like my mom and dad, they came here with the living memories of their homeland. But for those of us who are born in places like Canada or the US, we've never had a direct connection to a motherland. So we've often raised with Hindu values at home, but they exist in this little bubble, separate from our school life or our public identity with our friends or our co-workers. I know for myself, growing up, being a Hindu felt like a private thing. It wasn't something that you talked about outside of your home. And that's how I grew up. But as a parent, I'm trying to change that now. My kids are growing up in a home where being Hindu isn't hidden. It's normalized. I'm bringing it to my kids' school. It's something to be proud of, not something that we tuck away. But this is where things get interesting because globalization has changed everything. Urban India today is probably more westernized than many of us in the diaspora. And we see it on social media, people wearing Western clothes and speaking English, or even downplaying or distancing themselves from their Hindu identity. So sometimes you may end up with this sort of reversal where us in the diaspora are rediscovering and reclaiming the tradition while parts of urban India are moving further away from it. Now, let's talk about relationships and values. Yeah, there are big changes growing up here in the West. Here, dating is a part of life. I dated before I got married. That wasn't always easy to navigate in a Hindu household, but it's a reality. And when we talk about values like individualism and liberalism, I actually think that true liberalism, what you might call classical liberalism, is very compatible with Sanatan Dharma. Hinduism doesn't have a centralized authority. It encourages debate and exploration and self-inquiry. It teaches us that truth can be reached through many paths. I think that's liberal at its core. The challenge, though, is that in the West today, that needle has moved. What's called liberal now often includes ideologies that reject tradition, and they blur this line between freedom and moral relativism. That's where the tension comes in. So how do we navigate this? Well, first we have to know our roots. Teaching our kids not just follow what I do. We have to make the spaces where you can be modern but rooted in a tradition. And you have to realize that being Hindu in the West is going to look a little bit different. And that's okay. We're not here to copy what's happening in India. And we're not trying to blend in completely either. We're here to build something different. A North American Hindu identity. Question 8. FN Midas 793 asks, are there Hindu organizations doing Garwapsi? Do Hindus actively preach or spread Hinduism the way other religions do? Alright, this one touches at some deep civilizational differences. Let's start with the term Garwapsi, where it literally means homecoming, and it refers to this process of reconverting people back to Hinduism. And it's usually those whose ancestors either left Hinduism due to colonization or coercion or social pressure. So it's not about converting outsiders into Hindus, it's about bringing Hindus back to their ancestral tradition. Now to your actual question, is this happening in Canada or North America? The short answer is not really. Not in sort of any large or organized way. You don't see any formal reconversion programs happening here. Now there may be individuals who reconnect with their Hindu roots, but it's not part of some type of coordinated effort like you might see in other parts of India. Now, do Hindus preach or spread their faith the way other religions do? Again, not traditionally speaking. Hinduism has never really been about proselytizing. The attitude has always been there are many paths to this truth, and follow whatever path is right for you. But I think it's also something that we need to think about carefully, because while we have taken this sort of hands-off approach that other traditions, they haven't done that. And conversions out of Hinduism, it's a reality, especially in vulnerable communities. There are groups like ISKCON, for example, that are more outward-facing and they chant publicly. They distribute books, the Bhagavad Gita. They invite people into Hindu philosophy, and honestly, I have to respect them for that. They're not forcing anyone, but they're offering something, and they're saying, here's what we believe. Come see if this speaks to you. So maybe the deeper question is, should we be doing more of that? Should Hindus be making more of an effort to educate, to share, and to reawaken interest in Sanatana Dharma? Not to convert others, but maybe to revive the tradition, because in today's world, if you're not preserving this identity, honestly, you're slowly losing it. And we shouldn't be afraid to share who we are. Question 9 from Karma 7306. I live in Ottawa and I try to spread Sanatana Dharma online, but people don't engage. Should I keep going? Should I change something? The short answer, yes, keep going. The longer answer, alright. Social media can be frustrating because you pour your heart into your content and sometimes all you hear is crickets. I've been there and I still go through it. But don't let low engagement question your intention, because what you're doing is important. That said, let's be honest here, okay? Online engagement is a tricky thing because social media isn't just about your message. It's about how you package that. The platforms reward hooks, short form videos, and emotional storytelling, personality. You got to do it often, and sometimes even controversial things. Now, I say all this as someone who's also balancing a full-time job, raising kids, volunteering at the temple, and still trying to make time for content creation. It's not easy, but it's doable if you focus on small wins. So here are a few things you can do. Make short reels with captions. Pick one shlok or a story or even a sentence and build it into a 30-second reel. Use your face and your voice. A lot of Hindu content creators, they are going into these AI generated videos, but people connect with you, not just text or slides. Ask questions, turn your post into conversations, not lectures. One video, you can make it into a reel, you can make it into a quote card, a YouTube short, or even an Instagram story. These are all things that you can do to maintain your presence on social media. But most importantly, my one advice to you is be consistent, even if that means just doing one good post a week. There was a time that I had to take 5 years off of social media because I couldn't be consistent with it. It was when my kids were born. And you know what? Sometimes I do look back and I wonder, where could I have been if I didn't stop? But you know what? I needed that break for myself, and now I'm back into it. And remember that you're planting seeds, Sometimes what you plant right now may not come to fruition right now, but further down the line, someone might stumble upon your content and thank you for it. So keep going. Question 10, Daniel Moore, 7105 asks, have you considered making content focused on Hindu scriptures like the Puranas? That would be incredibly useful. Yes, I've considered it, and to be honest, it's something that I think about a lot. But here's the thing, the question isn't, should I cover the Puranas? It's, how do I cover it? Do I simply retell the stories? Do I go into the symbolism and philosophical depth behind those stories? Or do I connect these stories to the wisdom and modern day issues that we're all facing as Hindus in the diaspora? Or maybe I explore how these stories have survived colonization or conversions or cultural erasure, especially in places like the Caribbean. These are all things that I'm thinking about all the time. And there's already so many people on YouTube, creators who break down the Ramayana and they explain it in different ways. So I always ask myself, what can I do that is different? And maybe it's my perspective growing up as a Canadian-born Hindu. Maybe it's how these stories traveled all across Guyana, Trinidad, Suriname, Fiji. But I need to do it in a way that speaks to my voice, to my upbringing, and to my point of view. So, yes, that's something that I'd love to do. I need the time for it, and when I do, I want to make sure it's not just a retelling of the story. I want it to mean something for the people that are watching. So that's a wrap. As I said, I'm splitting up this video into 2 parts because it's a lot of questions. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe to my channel, and the next video will be released in a few weeks. Om Shanti.